Ra, ra, dash, ra, har, ra, har, dash, ra, har, dash, ra, re, dash, re, ne, ge, ne, ge, ra, ne, ge, re, ne, ge, ra, re, ge, ne, ge,
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. My name is Melody Brooks, and I am the artistic director of the New Perspective Theater Company, which is hosting Theater from the Streets. Just a brief introduction to what this program is all about. This is the fifth country that we visited, having done Palestine, Lebanon as a combined, India, Venezuela, and the Philippines. We started this program with a group of women who are all affiliated with the League of Professional Theater Women here in New York and the international award that the league gives every 3 years. So we had a team of women in 2021 who were able to maintain connections because of the miracle of Zoom. And we wanted to find a way to use our theater skills and the work we were doing in each of our countries to bring attention to things that needed changing. So we want to look at countries that are experiencing increased authoritarianism, loss of civil rights, and that theater as a great tool to tell those stories. We really want to engage an international audience in a conversation about how we can, as artists and as citizens, try to figure out how to work together to stop this authoritarian impulse. We're here today with Zsófi Kozma from Hungary, and Aniko is our wonderful moderator, and she will put this work in context for us, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience.
It is a big honor to be able to do this, and also a great responsibility. In Hungary, independent artists are in a really difficult and stressful situation right now. It is practically impossible to secure enough funding for making work, and all the big funding goes to state theaters that are often less progressive. The theater world is also very divided. People who reflect the government's conservative values are more in favor. I have chosen 8 wonderful independent artists for this project. They all approach theater making from a very different perspective. So you will see dramatic theater, documentary theater, device theater. These are all performers, theater makers, a choreographer, a singer-songwriter who are doing amazing work in the independent field in Hungary.
Prime Minister Orbán Viktor has been in power for 12 years now with a supermajority in the parliament. And during these past 12 years, he transformed a very new, very young democracy into what he first so proudly described as an illiberal democracy, and later what we can only describe as an authoritarian regime led by oppressive, conservative, nationalist Christian ideologues. This government that has been re-elected again and again in democratic, although very much rigged and gerrymandered elections, now very often termed as an electoral autocracy. And the reason for that, because it has been re-elected again and again. Orbán's regime is also a populist government. Populists are dividers, not uniters, asserts political scientist Cass Model. And indeed, Orbán's populist government, claiming to be, quote, guided by the will of the people, split society into 2 antagonistic groups. With one group, those who embody or subscribe to the conservative Christian values, is considered to be morally superior.
It is a great honor to be invited here. I think it is just fair to hear the voice of soberness and common sense, to hear the voice of your opposition. What I would like to talk about is a new program that is invited by our government. Thanks to this new program, the numbers are decreasing. And because of these decreasing numbers, anti-Gypsyism is decreasing too. Living the way the Gypsies live is, there is a decision behind it. They like it that way. And of course, living like that it has a price that is poverty and exclusion, the price of this freedom. And I think it is only natural, and they like it that way. They like it natural. But thanks to this new program, as I said, their numbers are decreasing, and thus anti-Gypsyism is decreasing too. And we have this other burden that, I don't know, have you ever heard this statistics, that almost every other Hungarian citizen is a woman. Did you understand? It's clear? Almost every other Hungarian citizen is a woman. And that is an extremely high concentration of women in a society so small. And are the Hungarian women here now around me to be complaining? No, they are not. And this is how they express their opinion, by not showing up here. And that is an opinion to be respected, period. Now, if we talk about women, we have to mention gay people too. And I think it is a nonsense. Have you ever seen me kissing a man? No, you haven't. Why? Because I can keep away from that. It's just that simple. They taught me that it's not okay, so I don't do that. And do you hear me complaining? I simply just can't understand how can one not be able to do as I do. I think it's kind of the same like with the gypsies. It's a question of willpower. And in the lack of willpower, just common sense. I mean, why have sex with no purpose? And now I would like to point out that all these positive changes are due to the growing popularity of human flesh consumption. And it's only yet a pilot project, but be a little bit of, have a little bit of imagination now. When a number is decreasing, another number is going up, as the old saying goes. There could be less and less unemployment. The wages would be rising. Real estate business would be flourishing. No queuing at the plazas. There are empty beds in hospitals. And at the end of the day, we might encourage migration. I would like to emphasize that it was meant to be a joke, but I find it inappropriate. There's always a reason to become a victim. And no one is persecuted by accident. Strong is strong, weak is weak.
Orbán solidified his power. In other words, he consolidated an autocracy by presenting himself as a paternalistic protector of the nation and a protector of Christian and nationalist values, who would shield Hungarians from migrants, who would be threats to the Judeo-Christian values, and also a fearless combatant of the European Union, who is not afraid to fight back if he feels that Hungary's autonomy is contested. In Orbán's regime today, we more and more see that those who are not with them, who are not willing to fit themselves into the conservative nationalist Christian ideological state, they become an enemy who will not be supported, or in the case of the most recent teachers' protests, even tolerated by the state. Now, of course, it's important to emphasize that these enemies are not violently persecuted, perhaps just yet, but they are professionally marginalized and financially completely disenfranchised.
Bless me, my mother, for I have sinned. My last confession was exactly 12 years ago. Since then, I was, very busy mother. As I'm nearly walking to my own death, I thought, mother, it's time to confess. In front of you, mother, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to tell the truth like a little child at the gate of heaven,
I confess that recently I made some teachers silent and I kicked them out from the schools. It must be very hard for them, I know, to leave their students and colleagues and their well-paid jobs. But they were too loud at the protests and exhausted, my dears. I felt I need to give a break for them. Please forgive me, mother, for all the sins I've made. I'm sorry, mother, for banning the LGBT content in schools and kids' TV. I know I was pretending like they don't exist. Sorry for demonizing refugees and putting a barbed wire fence to keep them from crossing into our country.
I know these poor guys really deserve better, Mother, but we have such a small, tiny little country. Sorry for those penalties against the homeless people, the dumpster diving, sleeping on the bench. God, these beauties must be freezing outside. They should take care of their own health. So I thought it's better not to sleep for them on the streets, you know. I had to give them the penalty for that. It's our duty to protect our people. I had this idea before that I would love to see Orbán Viktor to make a confession, or like I would love to see him on the last day of his life when like tomorrow he dies and how does he want to go to the other world, even if it's heaven or hell, we don't know yet, but what would he do on this last day? And then I got this idea that I want to make him confess. I really found important that he confesses not to God or Jesus Christ, but to Virgin Mary, because I feel a lot of disrespect from him towards women in our societies. This list I made, it was just a selection of things that I felt strongly about. So the LGBT content is very strong for me, that he banned it. The penalty against homeless people, I was protesting in that time when this law was coming out, that any homeless person who was dumpster diving or sleeping on the bench, if they were catched, they had to pay. And that was one thing I felt, that if you really make homeless people pay, I'm going to stand up. And I was going to the municipality. The police came and they brought us prison for a day. So there were a couple of things actually that I'm really personally, I was also involved in protests.
Part of the impetus for this program, from my point of view, was that we are experiencing this here. There is a significant population on the right in this country that loves Viktor Orban, that is pushing for the US to go in the same direction as, you know, Christian, white, ethno-nationalist state, and even to the ridiculousness of how do homeless people pay for anything if they have no money? I mean, you know, there is no logic to any of it, but it's I think it's just seriously important. I know we're not the only country that is experiencing it, but I think we're one of the most important. And I don't say that in a, you know, hail America kind of way, but that the US is so powerful and so determinative of so much.
As far as the government is concerned, through the policies and laws, the ideological state apparatus has established that only certain groups of the society deserve the state's and the people's care.
Hello, I'm Mrs. Erdélyi. Terry said I could come by today.
Hello. Please take a seat. Let's get this over with. Would you mind handing me your phone? You are a single mother, correct?
My husband is gone. No one knows where he went.
How old are the children?
2, 6, and 16.
Oh, you won't be getting a full child allowance until the little one turns 3, but only for a year, because after that the oldest will turn 18. Now you're on maternity benefit, which is 25,630. The family allowance is 51,000, which adds up to 76,630 a month, correct? Do you have any other regular income, a stipend for the eldest, support from the family, or any black market work?
No, nothing of the kind.
I heard you sew for people every now and then. Is that right? How much does that bring in?
Not much, maybe 5,000.
Shall we say between 8 and 10?
Something like that.
Do you have any outstanding loans? Do you owe anyone money? Whom and how much?
I have some past due electricity bills.
When did you last pay for electricity?
About 3 months ago. I owe them about 40,000.
There's always good old Provident. If you happen on the nice agent, you might get 40,000 to be paid back in monthly installments. That's 10 in principal plus interest every month, which works out to about 21 or 2,500 a month. Multiplying that by 4 months, you will end up paying 86,440. Am I going too fast? Or can you follow me? Let's see. Say I give you 40 large. It would be for 2 months, because I have turned around my capital too with a 50% interest rate. So 30,000 for the month, and you will be paying 60 at the end. If there's a month's delay, I am flexible. It's not the end of the world. At the end of the day, you pay 60, not 86, like with Provident. Is that acceptable?
Acceptable, yes.
You need to sign a loan agreement, which doesn't mention the interest, just the final sum. If I don't get my money back, or if you don't keep me informed, I don't mess around. I will pass it on to the debt collector.
Village Day is a play which could be in a lot of villages in Hungary, unfortunately. But it's a very poor village. Mostly Roma people is living there. But for example, my character is not a Roma character. So there are also Hungarian people living in these conditions. And Mara, who was played by Emilia now, is a moneylender, because urges this kind of work is the position is urging from the necessity that people have of this condition that they are without money, not by the end of the month, but very before the end of the month. So they need to get money somehow. So generally this kind of person, this moneylender person, is appearing in between the village people. And he will lend money for interest. And we saw a scene from the play that I am one of the persons of the village who is going to Mara's place to lend some money. And she's explaining to me how much percent, and she's a very clever woman in these topics, you know, that she knows all the conditions, the Provident, which is a bank, and offers this kind of money lending as well. And she's explaining to me why she's better than Provident, and explaining to me the whole situation. So this is a reality in Hungary.
Hungary is one of the oldest countries in Europe. It was founded in 895. Considering the population size, Hungary is ranked second in the number of gold medals won in the Olympic Games ever. Did you know that Budapest has the most significant amount of thermal springs? I wish I could share more fascinating news about Hungary and give you a proper tour, but I've just run into my dear friend Gyula, whom I would like to introduce to you. I think he's someone you should all know.
Balogh Gyula vagyok. 15-35 éves koromig minden nap alkoholt fogyasztottam. 23 évvel ezelőtt hajléktalanná váltam, ellenben az alkoholt 10.382 nappal ezelőtt el tudtam engedni. 13 évvel ezelőtt pedig hajléktalan érdekvédelmi aktivista lettem.
Homeless people living on the street, a familiar sight to us all,
are just the tip of the iceberg. You wouldn't recognize the majority of homeless people as such just by looking at them. They tend to live in institutions for the homeless. But it is important to note that there are 4 million people in Hungary who either live in a leaky, overcrowded, or unheated flats, with no bathroom or have over 3 months of debt on their mortgage or bills.
Most éppen egy rendi étteremlánc előtt állunk, amely arról híres, hogy amikor megnyitott, akkor ingyenes volt a WC-je. Azóta ez megszűnt, és 300 forint alkalmanként, és Budapesten sajnos mindössze egy tucatnyi ingyenes WC van. Nem tudom, hogy önök hogy vannak vele, de én naponta 10-15-ször kell, hogy mosdóba menjek, amit ha beszorzok 300-zal, akkor a gatyámat is eladhatnám. Egy építészeti csodát szeretnék önöknek bemutatni, ezt a fémszerkezetet, mely megakadályozza az embereket, elsősorban a hajléktalan embereket, abban, hogy leüljenek pihenni, és esetleg kihasználják a boltból kiáramló meleg levegőt. Ez egy önkormányzati iroda. 2013-ban a jobboldali polgármester azért, hogy ne látszódjanak a hajléktalan emberek éjszaka az utcán, erőszakkal behozatta ide őket, és körülbelül 20 kinyitható ágyra lefektette őket. Ezáltal akarta a szegénységet eltakarni.
Hungary must be the only country where the illegality of homelessness is included in the constitution.
The pervasive state propaganda celebrates a trouble-free Hungarian society under the current regime. Quote, Hungary performs better, claimed the sea of state-sponsored posters on the streets and in the ads of national centralized media, whether it is thanks to the invisibility of disabled children and adults due to the lack of inclusive institutions, or the clean Budapest streets free of the homeless people and other lowlives, as we just saw in Martin's performance, or the quote, decrease of anti-Roma sentiments that Christoph so sarcastically beautifully presented to us. It took 12 years for the Orbán government to brainwash the Hungarian society. Those who deserve care are taken care of by the regime, and the rest, well, who cares if pun is intended in this case. It is no surprise that under these circumstances, showing care, being curious and or nurturing is the least fashionable or relatable position in society. The government has convinced millions of Hungarians that the individuals should not burden themselves with the emotional and ethical work of care.
Act number 79 of 1992 on the protection of fetal life was enacted by Parliament in the knowledge that fetal life, which begins at the moment of conception, deserves respect and protection. The fundamental law of Hungary entered into force on the 1st of January 2012, replacing the Constitution of the Republic of Hungary. Article on freedom and responsibility in Chapter 2 states that human dignity is inviolable. Every person has the right to life and human dignity, and the life of the fetus is protected from consumption. According to Dóra Dúró, female member of the Hungarian parliament, it is a misconception that women have the right to self-determination or freedom of choice. According to Hungary's Prime Minister, the amendment to the abortion law from 1992 is not the issue we need to deal with now, because there are sanctions, there is a war, energy prices are sky high, and we have the left wing of the dollar behind us. So this is not the issue we need to deal with in these circumstances. Women are giving birth 25% more than 10 years ago. But there are also 25% fewer women of childbearing potential. While it may be a political goal that Hungarian women should have at least 2 children, it would be more useful to move to the statement that Hungary's population should be sustainable, says Balázs Kapitány, member of Population Research Institute of the Hungarian Central Statistical Office. If abortion is suddenly banned in a society, the birth rate will obviously spike a year later, but most of the children born then will not be born later. It's not just fertility we should be talking about. Mortality and migration are equally important factors. Migration has even become taboo. And when we talk about mortality, we talk about it as a health problem. The Hungarian government's family policy is in fact throwing money at the citizens. The question is, if we invested the same amount of money in improving the quality of education for existing children or in improving the quality of nursery care, would that not be more effective?
This performance was inspired about how I feel in Hungary, and why do I feel it difficult to live here as a woman in this case, as a woman in a childbearing age. So the Hungarian government puts a lot of pressure on Hungarian women, as you have seen it in the performance, and it's a really new experience that for me, that I just realized that they do it for real. So it's not they take it serious, which is for me very unbelievable, because I don't think that any politics or any party should use bodies to I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit emotional. So they shouldn't use living human bodies to keep their politics going on, because demography is not only about fertility, but also about mortality and migration. And migration is a taboo, as I said in the performance in our country, and of course mortality, as they don't talk about that much. So yeah, I am kind of angry because of it, and also because that statesmen like women do not have, so it's a misunderstanding that women have self-determination and freedom. If someone, a Hungarian female politician, can say that in the media, in the Hungarian media, and no one says anything, at this point, I'm not sure how to deal with this emotion, and what shall I do, and how should I react?
March the 31st, 2020, a package of legislation amendments is proposed by Hungary's Deputy Prime Minister. Hidden in a mesh of unimportant changes, a horrifying bill is hidden. This later accepted bill, called Paragraph 33, is designed to ban the legal recognition of transgender and intersex people. December the 15th, 2020, the government expands its constitution with the sentence, "The mother is a woman, the father is a man," making adoption for LGBTQIA+ people impossible at a constitutional level. June the 15th, 2021, the government passes another package of laws. They refer to it as the child protection laws. We refer to it as the anti-LGBTQ laws. The reports of international news sites are true, but do not give full coverage on the issue. Amongst other consequences, these laws make appropriate LGBTQ representation impossible, for example, by banning openly LGBTQIA+ people from featuring in educational content or TV shows for people under the age of 18. What most international news sites forgot to mention is that these laws came in together with a modification increasing the severity of the punishment of pedophile offenders. In the eyes of our society, through passing these modifications under the so-called Child Protection Bill umbrella, the government successfully blurred the otherwise strong and unquestionable lines between our community and the practitioners of a sexual paraphilia. I organized a Hungarian folk dance workshop for LGBTQIA+ people as an extension of a party of OMO, a Budapest-based queer collective that I was part of. My motivation in doing so was to expand the scope of my artistic practice and to give something directly to the community. The small workshop, which hosted approximately 20 people, created a huge backlash with more than a dozen articles on sites controlled by the centralized governmental media and other alt-right media outlets. Some of these articles proclaimed us as enemies of the state. Others called us a part of the LGBTQP movement. And here I'm quite sure I don't need to help you with figuring out what the letter P stands for. The Hungarian governmental propaganda's primary strategy resides in fabricating enemies of the state. Left-wing parties, the EU, George Soros, the refugees, and lately, the queers. The government's control over the media is just too high for us to be able to confront their narrative impactfully.
According to the statistics, in 2022, more than 3 million people voted for Fidesz, that's Orbán's party, out of the approximately 8 million citizens and non-citizens with voting rights, because that's something peculiar that Orbán did, is that he granted voting rights to those ethnic Hungarians who do not live in Hungary. And he did get those votes, of course.
Orbán has been re-elected over and over again. And yes, there is gerrymandering going on and everything, but do people feel oppressed, manipulated by his regime, or is there actually a sort of an emotional support behind Orbán's regime and his strong stance also against the EU and what he's trying to do with this country?
Orbán's regime has gained its popularity by masterfully manipulating the people's emotions during the past decade, playing into their darkest fears and deepest desires.
Just to give you an example, when the war started in Ukraine, when Russia invaded and attacked Ukraine, it was just before the elections. And so Fidesz, the party of Orbán, changed its strategy into saying, if the opposition wins, we are going to war. And we saw it in like, it was just everywhere in the country. So it was like a full propaganda on it. To make it understandable how the support gathers around this party and the person of Orbán is to see that his propaganda machine is amazing in creating sweet spots where it really hurts. So, for example, when my husband went just before the elections to other cities than Budapest to kind of campaign for the opposition, people were telling him, you know, yeah, Orbán says a lot of shitty things and he's lying and we know that there are lots of things, but we don't want to go to war. And they bought it. And so the thing is that there are loads of small things that touches the Hungarian spirit. This is one of them. And the other one is that we're the small country who's always been left behind. We're always been, you know, just the country behind everyone's thoughts. And he's making this nationalist idea of now we're not letting the European Union walk through us and make us do things. Actually, he's doing lots of things that like, you know, inviting big companies and big factories and everything. But he tells Hungarians that this is the time that we're showing the middle finger to the big European Union and kind of, you know, stepping up to ourselves. There is a great understanding of the Hungarian psyche by him, and with that he gathers supporters, and which is very much connected to this, we don't have a real opposition. We don't have true figures from the opposition, which is due to the I don't know if you say this, the character killing of everyone who comes along to become opposite of him. But yeah, we don't have another side.
We think of Florida and Ron DeSantis is compared to Orbán here too, which is no opposition, targeting your enemies, using the power of the state to reward your allies and friends. So this is now the 5th country that we have had a session in with Theater from the Streets. Each country has its own very unique issues. One of the things that's interesting to hear from you all, for me, because we know a lot about what's going on in Hungary, but this idea of the Hungarian psyche, of how that is playing in to the support for Orbán, that even when people know that there's issues, that their personal stake in supporting him, again, is very Trump-like.
Fear continues to motivate the majority of Hungarian people in their everyday life and political choices. People are subsumed by fear of the war in the neighboring Ukraine, fear of migrants, and fear of even greater poverty that might hit them. Freedom as an experience and a concept is either undefined or undervalued by many Hungarians. The freedom and the imperative to make our own choices, the freedom to protest, the freedom to be your most authentic self are simply incomprehensible for so many people, because these are discussions that just never happened. One of the things that artists do, they try to engage in conversations with those people who still go with and still vote for the prime minister.
I think it's a cultural thing that for Hungarian society, democracy, the practice of democracy is not really developed. We didn't have much time, as Aniko said, we are a very young democracy, so we didn't have time to develop the tools how to use our right to raise awareness of things that are happening. For me personally, I have hard feelings about the Hungarian music industry because it's completely apolitic, and the only genre, so to say, that I find who speaks about issues, what's happening in politics and in society is the super underground, is the punk scene, is the most post-rock scene and some of the hip-hop scenery, but it's really not mainstream at all. And I find it a very burdening issue in Hungary because I think music is the means of art that goes the closest to everyday audiences, because it's in the radio, it's on YouTube, it's all on all these platforms that could really come close to people.
Meg kell a búzának érni, s meg kell a búzának érni, s meg kell a búzának érni, ha minden nap meleg éri, s meg kell szívemnek hasadni, ha minden nap bánat éri. Bánat, 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 de nehéz vagy. Bújj ki bánat a szívemből, elég volt már becsületből. Salalala.
Yeah, the background of this video, actually, it was a music video without the script that came out in the fall this year after this crazy hot summer with this big drought. And it's a Hungarian folk song that I covered with my band, that we made it more electronic and kind of psychedelic in a way.
60 questions for Prime Minister Viktor Orbán that cannot be asked. Mr. Prime Minister, do you feel personally responsible for the deterioration of the living conditions of Hungarian people? Why do you avoid discussions or debates? Why do you not answer journalist questions? How can you sleep at night? I would ask the audience, why are you legitimizing a dictator with your participation? A dictator whom one cannot ask anything in Hungary, with whom one cannot debate, who destroys democratic institutions, who is Putin's European vassal. Do you have any idea how people in Hungary actually live? How high are the rents? What catastrophic conditions are there in hospitals? And how much money do all independent Hungarian theaters have? Why not increase teachers' salaries? Why not spend more money on education? Can you distinguish between right and wrong? Why not do good with the power you hold in your hands? Can you guess how many million euros you stole from the Hungarian treasury? What are those Christian values you talk about so often? That would interest me very much, because I don't know any human values that only apply to Christians. Why are you still such good friends with Putin? How do you imagine your future? Does it satisfy your grandiose dreams to be prime minister of an increasingly empty, impoverished and oppressed country, rather than a developing European one?
I'm very engaged politically, and it was very important to me that in Hungary there's really not allowed to ask any kind of questions from him, and it was just important to me that I can be the channel of the voice of the people, and that they can be still heard, not from Viktor Orbán, but them on the streets, from the people. So it was just a spontaneous happening. And it was very symbolic to me that, it happens in Hungary all the time, that the voice of the people cannot be heard. And it happened in Berlin as well.
How do you, as artists and very socially and politically aware and active artists, in your work, I have a twofold question. One is, do you experience repercussions, direct or indirect? In the sense direct, that you are threatened or feel you can't put your work forward; indirectly, that you just don't get funding for it?
It's been challenging, because I just got to a point where I made my freelance license, and they just introduced that new tax law in the middle of the summer, and then suddenly I had no means of actually getting paid.
There is no money, but there is no actual dangerous threat. But what I experience from the different perspective, that many people are scared, and there is a self-censorship, through the arts. And for instance, I'm having a show, and I wrote and directed it, and I'm on stage as well as myself. And it's highly political, very political. And we performing it in Berlin, but it was invited to one of the biggest Hungarian theater festivals last year. And I'm shouting and yelling on stage against Viktor Orbán. And this is no problem for me, because I've been very active politically. And there was one other Hungarian performer in my show, and she had no problem with it at all, to perform it in different festivals, many places in Europe. But before the show in Hungary, although she's not active in Hungary on the theatrical level or politically, she just told me that she's scared to say some sentences on stage in Hungary. She just did some self-censorship because she was scared that some, Fidesz people should be there, and this could be bad for her family. What I'm doing, it's very direct, it's very actual and very political, and I can understand that she was scared. Although from my point of view, you won't go into jail if you say something political on stage, but maybe it can happen that you get no funding.
Again, the commonalities across countries, that the idea of self-censorship was also discussed in India, because the laws are changing. Artists are being jailed without charges, without bail, and also it's a huge, it's a continent almost all by itself, that the regional, differences, and but that the real danger, almost more in some of their feelings than the actual physical danger or the danger of being arrested, was when artists begin to shut down, begin to turn away, begin to self-censor.
I do think that one of the bigger dangers when it comes to Hungary is that out of the 8 panelists that we had here, at least 5 or 6 of them are already transitioning to live in other countries or negotiating to be able to work and create in more artist-friendly environments. And so that is another challenge.
No, I'm just thinking of two examples that how direct it can be. One example is that there is an independent theater. It's called Atrium, and I know that one of the Fidesz politicians went to see a show, and the show was highly political as well, and doing some critics on Orban. And we don't know, there is no evidence, but the next day the funding was cut for this theater. So there is never this really clear evidence, but we are suspicious. And I think if things can happen to teachers, what's happening now, that they are just fired because they are politically active, I'm quite 100% sure it could happen with us also anytime. And another concrete example that I don't know how familiar you are with this story, that there was a theater and film university, which was just taken by the government. And there was a huge protest, occupation of the university and all that. And there is a movement which is just trying to rebuild a new, not institution, let's call it yet movement. It's called Free SFF. And a lot of teachers, professors, and students left the old university because Fidesz just put their people in the institution. And I was teaching in the original institution, and I joined the Free SFA movement. I was a practicing lecturer in the old institution. Now I'm not allowed to enter there.
It's so interesting to me because the parallels, we already talked about DeSantis in Florida, but the suppression of teacher speech, that they're not allowed to talk about issues of gender or any of those things. And at the university level, they've had to sue all kinds of things that are such clear parallels. And also with Trump, that this dedicated, devoted fan base, luckily here, they're only about a third of the country, or probably even less. Seems like that there may be more fans with Orban, more of a higher percentage of the population.
I think it's very important to understand that the Hungarian political climate is not, it doesn't seem like an autocracy from the outside. Like, that's the trick of it. It really plays out like a free country. And they also say it's a free country. You can have your plays, you can have your music, you can have your lyrics, your books. Like, there are lots of material out there with politically opinionated against the regime, and they do get recognition. I would say that the biggest problem for me is that we are here, but this is like a very small circle. And the audience who sees what we do are the audience who are either also active or who think the same. So it's very hard to reach out and to make a change through the art in this way, because it's like we live in little bubbles.
I would like to disagree here a little bit, because one thing I find very interesting and inspiring about this panel is the generation that you represent. And I do think that for a generation that's not as internationally situated, that do not speak languages, that have a lot more fear in them, and who have just much harder time navigating a system that very much brings back memories of what it felt like to live in a dictatorship, would probably describe these experiences very differently. They experience their marginalization and their disenfranchisement very differently. And I feel that there's something that's being neglected, understandably so, is that there's a whole generation that has almost disappeared from the scene, both artistic and I would say intellectual scene, and we don't even have the desire, or we don't even make an effort to somehow engage with those generations with whom we share, I think, worldviews, we share experiences, but they are on the margins of the field right now.
We are in New York, sitting here very safely as theater artists, but more and more in our own country, the drag shows that are being attacked literally with assault rifles around the country. The, other artists that are in peril, it still hasn't reached the level in some of the regions we've been to, but that's on the horizon. And we need a wake-up call globally and in the West in particular, I think. Joan Firestone. Joan, who is the co-chair of the International Award Program with the League of Professional Theater Women. Go ahead, Joan.
It seems that despite everything, there is an extraordinary artistic output in Hungary. And I wonder, what is the impact on the education system of your work? Who are the audiences? And will it penetrate beyond families into the system of education?
Is your artistic work able to break some barriers with young people, with kids in school, to challenge this populist government? How is the next generation being fostered or impacted?
I am working with again, like Roma, but it feels strange again that I am visiting children because of their Roma origin, but it's more because I'm visiting them because of poverty, because they wouldn't have normally a chance to meet those games that I can take to them. And this is what I do against the present political system, that I'm trying to bring mental hygienics into those places where it is needed. But it would be needed in elite schools as well.
What we personally do is that we make our performance accessible for underprivileged communities, and we often apply to international funds to be able to tour within Hungary, or even sometimes abroad, with this concept, and show it to people who would normally not make it to the theater. Community theater is much more immature in this part of the world as in the States, and it has a historical reason that traditionally in Europe, theater is funded by the governments, by the state, and we don't rely so much on the community that supports the theater. I think the new theater maker generation is making a shift now, because solidarity and curiosity strengthens artistic work as well, not just the communities.
These small scales of cultural performances, they are really powerful in building communities, and these small communities then can turn into larger communities. So there is the power of these bottom-up grassroots performances that might start to mobilize and sort of gather larger audiences. And I am also very hopeful. I'm someone who attended Martin's performance in the theater, the theater, Martin, that you mentioned. There were a lot of high school students, and I did think that, okay, these high school students will start to understand how complicated and how painful this experience is, and they will be able to juxtapose what they learned there with what the government so aggressively sort of imposing on Hungarian people today, this criminalizing homelessness, which is horrifying.
The question, and it's an important question, and it's actually at the heart of what Theater from the Streets is all about, and that is, what is the mechanism to really affect change, to really make a difference? And we're not presuming that sharing these pieces on Zoom is the end of things. We really saw it as the beginning. And I am grateful to these artists for raising that question and kind of demanding it a little bit. We had that in some of the round one countries as well. And the initial goal was that we would do the theater programs, and we would have them in a context, and we would have a invited audience. We have always wished that we had a larger audience from a greater global reach. But that using this work and using these conversations to build a groundswell, it's an idealistic vision. I'm an idealist, even still, that there would be a much larger global audience that would have awareness, that would be educated, that would see how each of these governments that is engaging in some form of suppression, whether it's a fully authoritarian government, whether it is, as in Hungary, an elected authoritarian government. We're seeing all of this happening in the US, and particularly in different states. But that if, as human beings, as people on the street, that if we all come to be more aware, and because we could have a connectivity internationally that we've never had before with Zoom, that we could begin to engage in some way with making change. We haven't gotten to that step yet. We're eager to have input and ideas from all the artists that we've worked with. It's been interesting because India had the technology and the financial resources was not really an issue for them, but they really were at risk legally for some of their work. Other places, Lupe Gerenbeck, she was our curator in Venezuela. And money and finding ways to give support was a big issue. With Zsófi, we're still trying to send them money because she informed me that if I gave her the money directly, she would have to pay a 40% tax on it. So we're working through different mechanisms. That's pretty astounding. New Perspectives really would like to create some kind of international program, platform, GoFundMe, I don't know what it would be. The Bariva Foundation in Liechtenstein gave us a great grant to do this round 2 and to edit all the videos so far.
I think that on the grand scheme of things in Hungary, there are just huge problem without any legal representation of independent artists. There is no union like in the United States. Just the general separation between the independent and the state theaters is what makes a lot of artists come to some barriers when it comes to making work. And I think internationalization is a huge opportunity for Hungarian artists.
The commonality across all 5 locations so far has been the suppression of women, and we know this in authoritarian states, the lack of resources for artists, unless the artists are speaking the party line, if they're in commercial theaters or high profile doing non-threatening work. But they've also all expressed a need for a platform like this, that the opportunity to interact with artists elsewhere has made them feel that they're not alone, that they're not the only ones going through it, and that there's strength in numbers. I would just ask each of the artists, in terms of this kind of platform, is it helpful?
It is. I live for the international cooperations and networks. It's really been helpful.
I would like to say it's highly useful. It's a little piece of land where I can practice my freedom, and I need it. It gives me courage, and it gives me some fresh air. So it's needed.
Something that I'm so hopeful of, actually, when I look at these artists' work, when I look at the artists' work this week and last week, is that, well, first of all, there is this demonstration of courage, that there is this demonstration of almost reckless commitment to the work. And I do think that through these performances, others might just see or recognize that there is more space here for creativity and advocacy and to be political, more importantly.
Meg kell szívemnek hasadni, ha